This trail is labeled easy, yet experienced hikers keep vanishing here. No storms, no injuries reported, just sudden silence. Phones go dead, tracks stop mid-path. Search teams say the terrain makes no sense for these mistakes. Whatever is happening doesn't match the difficulty rating, and that's what makes it unsettling. A corridor measured in trailheads. In the central Sierra Nevada, an easy trail is often defined by its first mile. A path can begin from a paved campground loop or assigned parking area with a clear tread, a gentle grade, and frequent foot traffic. In Yosemite National Park and the adjacent Sierra National Forest, these entries sit close together. White Wolf Campground on the park's north side, the Bridal Veil Creek area off Glacier Point Road, and the trailheads near the southern boundary are separated by drive times that feel ordinary on a map. On the ground, each entry point leads into terrain that changes in small steps, forest to granite, shade to sun, a maintained junction to a faint route that still appears walkable to someone moving steadily. The National Park Service maintains public notices for certain active missing person cases connected to Yosemite. These notices read like field summaries. They give a name, a year, a last known location, and a short account of what is known from vehicles, campsites, and sightings. They also include requests to leave possible equipment in place and to document exact locations. The tone is administrative, and the details are practical. The entries show how quickly a normal trip can become an unresolved record, even when the departure point is a campground or a familiar trailhead. One of the listed cases begins outside the park boundary and then crosses into it. Sandra Johnson Hughes, age 54, was last seen on Saturday, the 4th of July, 2020, near the Chiquito Pass trailhead in Madera County. The notice states that she was camping alone in the Sierra National Forest, crashed her vehicle, and was seen walking away, refusing help from motorists. A sleeping bag matching a recent REI purchase was later found off-trail, about 2.5 miles north of the accident scene and just inside the Yosemite boundary. The same notice describes her original campsite as appearing abandoned, with most of her gear left behind, and notes that searches by the Madera County Sheriff and Yosemite National Park were unsuccessful. Another listing places the start of a disappearance inside a developed campground, with no single trail named as the intended route. Peter Jackson, age 74, is described as having been in excellent physical condition, with no medical concerns. The notice says he was believed to have gone on a day hike from his campsite at White Wolf Campground and never returned. It records a text to his son on the 17th of September 2016, stating he was on his way to Yosemite, and it notes that his vehicle was found at White Wolf, Site Viv8, with the site paid for through September 21. The same entry says his day pack was found in 2019 between Aspen Valley and Smith Peak. In this kind of case, the easy portion of a trip is the part that is most documented: the campsite, the car, the date range, and the usual gear. Public reporting on Yosemite incidents also shows how day hikes can extend beyond their planned window without involving technical terrain. On Saturday, the 3rd of August 2024, park officials reported that Miguel Delgado, 63, and Ana Rodarte, 40, left Bridalveil Creek Campground for a day hike around 10 a.m. The report described them as possibly headed toward Ostrander Lake and said the hike was expected to take only a couple of hours. When they did not return, a search followed, and officials later stated on Monday, August 5, that the pair had been found alive. The details in that report were straightforward: a start time, an intended general direction, a missed return, and a later confirmation. The gap between those points is often where confusion begins for other parties, because the original plan sounds simple and the terrain begins as established trail. Some Yosemite missing person events are tied to water, not route finding. During the July 2023 holiday weekend, a hiker named Hayden T. Klemenok went missing after entering Chilnuana Creek near a trail junction by Upper Chilnuana Falls. Reporting that cited a National Park Service statement, placed the time at approximately 2 p.m. and described cold, fast-flowing conditions driven by snowmelt. In that account, the disappearance began during a stop, not during an extended off-trail push. A person can move from trail to water in a few steps, and the administrative record of time and location can remain precise even when the physical outcome does not. Longer-term missing cases in Yosemite also show how search operations are documented after the fact. A set of released National Park Service materials on the Stacey Arras case includes contemporaneous news coverage and search summaries connected to her disappearance in 1981. Those materials describe Stacey Arras, age 14, disappearing near the end of a horseback trip in the Yosemite High Country after leaving a group to take photographs. The reporting in the file describes large search efforts involving volunteers, rangers, dog teams, helicopters, and extensive hours logged over multiple days, with searches concentrated around Sunrise Lakes and the Sunrise High Sierra Camp area south of Tenaya Lake. It records practical conditions that affected the search, including dry, dusty circumstances that limited scent work. The wording stays close to logistics, where people searched, how they moved, what the terrain looked like, and what the constraints were. The corridor concept is not limited to wilderness trails. Some disappearances begin at roadside pullouts, where short walks are treated as incidental. A documented example is the Jeannie Hesselschwert case from the 9th of July, 1995, described in a case write-up that places her on a drive toward Yosemite and on a stop along the road to Glacier Point. The account states that she and her boyfriend pulled over at a turnout and took separate short walks, and that she was not found when he returned a short time later. Incidents like this sit close to the same infrastructure that supports easy day hikes, parking areas, informal footpaths, and the assumption that a brief walk stays within sight of a vehicle corridor. When a missing person is later located, public updates can be minimal. A Yosemite National Park news release dated the 2nd of September 2015 states that rangers found the body of James Michael Millett Jr. on the 1st of September 2015 above Yosemite Valley, after he had been missing since August 11. The release adds that no further details were available at that time and that an investigation was ongoing. That kind of statement is common in park communications. It marks a change in status without offering narrative, and it does not describe the route or conditions that led to the outcome. Across these records, the opening conditions often sound ordinary: a campsite paid for several nights, a morning departure time, a planned lake destination, a turnout stop on a scenic road, a short walk to water on a hot day. The Sierra Nevada corridor, in and around Yosemite, is built to make those starts easy. Signage, trail grading, and familiar points of entry reduce friction at the beginning. The cases that become difficult to resolve are usually not recorded as dramatic departures from that beginning. They are recorded as absences noticed later, with the corridor itself providing the last fixed coordinates. How absence becomes a coordinate. When a hiker does not return, the first official change is not a search, it is a notation. Rangers or sheriff's deputies begin by fixing what can still be verified. Timestamps from campground check-ins, vehicle locations, permit logs, and phone records are collected and compared. The phrase, "last known point," is not a place where something happened. It is the last place where something was confirmed. Everything beyond that point exists without timestamps. In Yosemite National Park, this process is standardized. A vehicle found in a campground or trailhead lot establishes a boundary of certainty. Rangers record the exact parking space, the orientation of the vehicle, and whether doors are locked. In the Peter Jackson case from September 2016, the location of his vehicle at White Wolf Campground Site #58 was one of the few fixed details. The campsite was paid for through a future date, which indicated intent to remain in the area. No trail register entry narrowed his direction of travel. The absence of a permit for a backcountry overnight suggested a day hike, but did not indicate which junction he used. The last known point remained the campsite itself. Campsites often provide more information than trailheads. Rangers document what is present and what is missing. Food left behind, clothing still packed, or unused fuel can indicate that a person did not plan to be away for long. In the Sandra Johnson Hughes case, reports described her original campsite as abandoned, with most of her equipment left behind. That detail did not explain direction or duration, but it did anchor her movement to a specific time window. The sleeping bag later found inside the Yosemite boundary became a secondary coordinate, recorded with GPS and photographed in place before removal. Between those 2 points, the record remains blank. Trail registers are another administrative tool, though their use is inconsistent. Some trailheads maintain voluntary sign-in books, others do not. When present, these registers provide names, dates, and intended destinations written in personal shorthand. Rangers treat them cautiously. A name in a register confirms intent, not arrival. Many hikers change plans at junctions or turn around early. In missing person files, register entries are treated as supporting material rather than decisive evidence. If no entry exists, the absence is noted but not emphasized. Witness statements are logged in a similar way. Park dispatch records calls from other visitors who report seeing someone at a certain time or place. These accounts are written down with exact wording when possible. Phrases like mid-morning, around noon, or late afternoon are preserved as given. In the August 2024 incident involving Miguel Delgado and Ana Rodarte, the initial report included a start time of approximately 10 a.m. from Bridal Veil Creek Campground and a general plan to hike toward Ostrander Lake. The later confirmation that they were found alive did not include a detailed timeline of where they had gone. The last known point remained the campground departure, because that was the last moment verified by record. Mobile phone data sometimes narrows the window further, though coverage in the Sierra Nevada is uneven. When phones are recovered or pings are logged, investigators record the last successful connection. This information is treated as a coordinate in time rather than a location, since signal bounce and terrain interference can distort position. In some cases, a final text message provides context without direction. Peter Jackson's text to his son, stating he was on his way to Yosemite, fixed a date, but not a route. It did not reduce the search area, but it confirmed intent and timing. Once the last known point is established, maps are marked. Search planners draw concentric areas based on travel time, terrain difficulty, and known behavior patterns. But these planning tools are internal. Public-facing documents rarely describe them in detail. What is visible to the public is the phrase itself: last seen near, last known location, or believed to have gone hiking, from appear repeatedly in notices. These phrases do not imply error or deviation. They simply mark the edge of confirmed information. In water-related incidents, the last known point is often exact. The Hayden T. Clemenot disappearance in July 2023 was tied to a specific time and place near Upper Chilnualna Falls. Reports placed him entering Chilnualna Creek around 2 p.m. Cold water conditions were noted because they affect survival time and search strategy. In such cases, the coordinate is not a trail junction or campsite, but the entry point into water. That precision does not guarantee recovery. It only narrows the starting line. Historical cases show the same administrative pattern. In the 1981 disappearance of Stacey Aris, the last known point was recorded as a location near Sunrise Lakes, where she left a horsepack group to take photographs. Contemporary reports and later National Park Service summaries document the moment she separated from the group, the terrain conditions, and the scope of the search. They do not document her intended path beyond that point. The coordinate marks separation, not movement. Roadside disappearances are handled with the same framework. When Jeannie Hesselschwert vanished in July 1995 after stopping at a turnout along the road to Glacier Point, the last known point was the pullout itself. The account notes that she and her companion took separate short walks. No trail name was associated with the stop. The coordinate was defined by the vehicle's location on the road. From that fixed point, searchers documented surrounding terrain, informal footpaths, and line-of-sight distances. The absence of an official trail did not change the administrative process. When remains are found, the administrative language shifts again. In the September 2015 recovery of James Michael Millett Jr., the National Park Service announcement stated that his body was found above Yosemite Valley and that no further details were available. The notice did not restate his last known point or describe how far he had traveled. Once a person is located, the coordinate of absence is replaced by a recovery location, and the earlier mapping recedes into the file. Throughout these cases, the Sierra Nevada corridor is documented not as a continuous path, but as a series of fixed points, campsites, trailheads, pullouts, junctions, and water entries become anchors. The spaces between them are described only when something is found. Until then, they remain unmarked. It leaves them blank, defined only by distance estimates and time windows. This method keeps the record stable. It avoids speculation and preserves what can be verified. At the same time, it means that many disappearances remain defined by where someone was last confirmed to be, rather than where they intended to go or how they moved. In an environment designed to make the beginning of a hike simple, the paperwork reflects that simplicity. The complexity enters only after confirmation ends. Searches that follow the grid. Once a last known point is established, organized searching begins with measurement rather than movement. In Yosemite National Park and surrounding Sierra Nevada jurisdictions, search managers start by translating a confirmed coordinate into a map overlay. Topographic maps are marked with contour intervals, vegetation types, water features, and man-made structures. The area around the last known point is divided into sections, often called grids or segments, sized according to terrain and available personnel. Each segment is labeled and logged before anyone enters it. Search and rescue operations in the Sierra Nevada typically involve multiple agencies. Depending on location, these can include National Park Service rangers, county sheriff search teams, volunteer mountain rescue groups, and aviation units. Each group operates under an incident command structure. Roles are assigned in writing. One person manages operations, another tracks resources, and another maintains documentation. The process is procedural. Every action taken in the field is expected to be traceable to a written assignment. The first searches usually focus on high probability areas. These are not defined by mystery or intuition. They are defined by distance and ease of travel. Trails, old fire roads, ridgelines, and drainage paths are prioritized because they are visible on maps and because people tend to follow them, even unintentionally. In Yosemite cases, where a campsite is the last known point, rangers often begin by covering the nearest maintained trails within a limited radius. The size of that radius is based on time elapsed, average walking speed, elevation gain, and surface conditions. Searchers document terrain as they move. Notes include slope steepness, ground cover, visibility, and any obstacles encountered. These details are written down even when nothing is found. A completed grid is marked as searched, not as cleared. The distinction matters in records. A grid searched once may be searched again under different conditions, such as with dogs, after weather changes, or from a different direction. Canine teams are often deployed early, but their effectiveness depends on environmental factors. In dry Sierra Nevada summers, scent can dissipate quickly. In high-traffic areas like Yosemite Valley or popular campgrounds, overlapping human scent complicates tracking. Search logs from historical cases note these limitations plainly. In the 1981 search for Stacey Aris near Sunrise Lakes, reports described dry, dusty conditions that reduced scent retention, even though large numbers of volunteers and dogs were involved. The documentation lists hours worked and areas covered without attributing failure to any single cause. Aerial searches follow a separate protocol. Helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft are used to scan open areas, cliff bands, and inaccessible slopes. Flight paths are planned to ensure overlap, and observers are trained to look for color contrast and unnatural shapes rather than people themselves. Bright clothing, reflective objects, and disturbed vegetation are considered indicators. When nothing is seen, that absence is logged with the same precision as a sighting would be. Weather, light, angle, and wind conditions are recorded because they affect visibility. Water searches are handled differently. When a disappearance involves a creek, river, or lake, specialized teams assess flow rate, temperature, and downstream hazards. In snowmelt-fed systems like Chilnawalna Creek, cold water limits survival time and complicates underwater searches. Reports from such incidents often specify water temperature and current speed, because these factors guide decisions about diver deployment and downstream coverage. Even with precise entry points, water searches may be delayed or suspended due to safety constraints. As time passes, search strategies shift. Initial efforts prioritize rescue. Later efforts transition toward recovery. Though official language may not state this explicitly, the change is reflected instead in resource allocation. Helicopter hours may be reduced, volunteer numbers may decrease, search grids may expand outward from the last known point, following drainage patterns or elevation contours rather than trail networks. Each expansion is documented as a decision based on elapsed time and terrain, not on narrative interpretation. Public communication during searches is limited. Press releases usually state that a search is ongoing, that certain areas have been covered, and that anyone with information should contact authorities. They do not describe internal debates or uncertainties. When a search is suspended, the wording is careful. Agencies often say that active searching has been scaled back or paused, with the implication that it may resume if new information emerges. This phrasing appears consistently across Sierra Nevada cases. Documentation continues even after active searching ends. Case files include maps, logs, radio transcripts, and after-action reports. These materials are archived according to agency policy. In some instances, they are later referenced when remains are found years afterward. When Peter Jackson's daypack was discovered in 2019, 3 years after his disappearance, the find location was compared against earlier search grids. Records showed whether the area had been searched previously and under what conditions. The discovery did not retroactively explain earlier gaps. It added a new fixed point to an old map. Volunteer searchers follow the same documentation rules as professionals. They are briefed before entering the field and debriefed afterward. Their observations are written down, even if they seem minor. An overturned rock, a faint footpath, or a piece of clothing inconsistent with the environment is noted and photographed. Most of these notes do not lead to further action. They remain in the file as part of the cumulative record. In roadside disappearances, search grids are often irregular. Pullouts and scenic stops lack defined trail networks, so searchers work outward based on line of sight and terrain features. Steep slopes, dense brush, and drop-offs are mapped and prioritized. In the Jeannie Hesselschwert case near Glacier Point Road, historical accounts describe extensive ground searches around the turnout area, including ravines and wooded slopes below the road. The absence of a formal trail did not simplify the search. It required broader coverage. When a person is eventually found, search documentation shifts focus. Recovery locations are recorded with the same precision as last known points were earlier. In the case of James Michael Millett Jr., found above Yosemite Valley in September 2015, the National Park Service announcement did not detail how search grids related to the recovery site. Internally, those comparisons are part of the investigative record. Publicly, the information remains minimal. Across Sierra Nevada cases, the grid system reflects an effort to impose order on uncertainty. It does not attempt to reconstruct intent or decision-making. It measures space and time and records what has been checked. In areas labeled as easy, the grid often begins close to infrastructure and expands into complex terrain that looks continuous on a map but changes abruptly on foot. The search process remains methodical, regardless of outcome. Each grid walked, flown, or scanned becomes a line in a log. Over time, those lines accumulate into a record that shows effort without narrative. The land itself is treated as a variable environment, not as a story element. What remains unresolved is not hidden by the process. It is simply not filled in. Terrain that redirects movement. In the Sierra Nevada, terrain does not need to be extreme to alter direction. Subtle features shape movement long before cliffs or exposed slopes appear. Trails that begin level often cross shallow drainages, skirt granite outcrops, or follow benches cut into hillsides. These features guide the body without requiring conscious choice. A person walking steadily tends to follow what feels continuous underfoot, even when that continuity shifts away from a maintained route. Granite dominates much of Yosemite's landscape. It appears as slabs, domes, and low-angle shelves that interrupt forest soil. On maps, these areas are often marked as open rock, but on the ground, they can resemble natural walkways. Slabs tilt gently downward toward creeks or meadows, creating a sense of descent that feels intentional. In dry conditions, They offer firm footing and clear sightlines. A hiker stepping onto granite to avoid brush or mud may continue along it longer than intended, especially if the original trail edge is less distinct. Drainages play a similar role. Even minor seasonal streams carve shallow channels that collect foot traffic. Water shapes the ground into corridors of smoother soil and fewer obstacles. In the Sierra Nevada, these channels often run parallel to trails for short distances before diverging. A person who steps off a trail near a drainage may follow the channel instinctively because it provides an easier line of travel. Over time, that line can pull movement downslope, away from the trail network. Vegetation reinforces these patterns. In mid-elevation zones, forest floors alternate between open pine duff and dense understory. Areas with manzanita, chinquapin, or young lodgepole pine can become difficult to push through, even over short distances. Open patches, by contrast, invite continued movement. A hiker navigating around thick brush may take several steps into clearer ground and then continue along that opening, unaware that it angles away from the original route. Elevation changes in Yosemite often occur gradually. A trail labeled as easy may gain or lose only a few hundred feet over several miles. These changes are subtle enough that a person can descend without noticing the cumulative effect. In search records, elevation loss is frequently noted after the fact, when recovery locations are plotted below last known points. The descent itself does not feel dramatic while it is happening. It feels like following the land's natural slope. Rock steps and informal paths also contribute. Over time, repeated foot traffic creates faint routes that branch from maintained trails. These can lead to viewpoints, water access points, or former campsites no longer in use. Such paths are often unmarked and may fade in and out. To someone walking without stopping, they can appear as a continuation of the main trail, especially if the official route turns sharply or narrows at that point. Weather and light conditions affect perception of terrain. In bright midday sun, contrasts flatten. Shadows that define trail edges early in the morning or late in the afternoon become less distinct. Granite reflects light, and pale soil blends into rock. In these conditions, the visual cues that separate trail from surrounding ground are reduced. A person may continue forward on what looks like a clear path, only to realize later that the trail is no longer present. Snow alters terrain even more subtly. In early summer, snowfields linger in shaded areas and at higher elevations. Trails may disappear under snow for short stretches and reappear farther on. Hikers often cross these patches by following footprints or by choosing the most compacted surface. When the trail emerges again, it may do so at a different angle or elevation. In some cases, it does not emerge at all because the crossing point led onto a different feature, such as a drainage or open slope. Search documentation frequently notes terrain-driven movement patterns. Reports describe likely travel along ridgelines, downhill toward water, or along contours that minimize effort. These descriptions are not speculative. They are based on repeated observations across many searches. In Yosemite, search planners often expect unintentional descent because gravity and ease of travel favor downhill movement. This expectation shapes grid expansion, with more resources allocated below last known points. Cliff bands and steep drop-offs are usually mapped and avoided during normal hiking, but they can be encountered indirectly. A person following a drainage or granite slab may arrive at a sudden edge without having felt a change in difficulty beforehand. In some areas above Yosemite Valley, broad forested benches end abruptly at cliffs. The transition can be masked by trees until the edge is reached. Search and recovery records in these zones often note proximity to cliff systems without indicating deliberate approach. Terrain also affects sound and visibility. Forested slopes absorb noise, while granite walls reflect it. A person calling out may hear their own voice echo back, giving a false sense of proximity to others. Visibility can be limited by terrain folds, where a person is only a short distance from a trail but separated by a rise or hollow. In such cases, movement continues based on local cues rather than overall orientation. Maps simplify terrain. Contour lines suggest uniform slopes, but the ground itself is uneven. Small ridges and depressions that do not appear on maps can influence movement. A hiker, navigating by memory or general direction, may be guided by these microfeatures, drifting laterally or downward over time. When later plotted on a map, the path looks indirect, even though each step felt straightforward. In cases where remains are found years later, recovery locations often reflect these terrain influences. Items are discovered along drainages, below trail systems, or in open granite areas that lie outside primary search corridors. When these locations are compared with earlier search grids, it becomes clear that terrain guided movement into areas that were not initially prioritized. The land did not conceal these areas intentionally. It redirected movement in small increments. The Sierra Nevada corridor contains many such redirections. From the first mile onward, terrain offers choices that do not register as choices. A step onto rock, a turn around brush, a descent toward open ground. None of these actions require a decision to leave a trail. They emerge from the shape of the land itself. Search files reflect this understanding without emphasizing it. Terrain is described in practical terms: slope angle, vegetation density, rock type. These descriptions are used to plan searches, not to explain outcomes. The land is treated as a constant factor, influencing movement consistently across cases. In areas labeled easy, terrain often appears forgiving. The absence of immediate hazards creates confidence, yet the same features that make a trail accessible also make adjacent ground inviting. Over distance, that invitation can lead away from marked routes without any moment that feels decisive. The redirection does not announce itself. It accumulates through small alignments between foot and ground. By the time movement stops or changes, the original trail may be out of sight, separated by folds in terrain that are invisible on maps but present on the ground. Weather that alters the record. Weather in the Sierra Nevada is documented continuously, but its effects on movement and records often appear indirectly. Official case files rarely describe weather as a cause. Instead, they list conditions present during a hike, during a search, or during a recovery. Temperature, wind, precipitation, and snowpack are treated as environmental facts that frame other actions. Over time, these facts shape what is preserved in the record and what is lost. Daily weather patterns in Yosemite can change within hours. Morning conditions may be cool and clear, while afternoons bring heat, wind, or cloud buildup. Many documented disappearances begin under stable conditions. Departure times are frequently mid-morning, when visibility is good and temperatures are moderate. Search reports later note afternoon thunderstorms, rising winds, or sudden drops in temperature that occurred after a person was last seen. These shifts are recorded without emphasis, but they affect both travel and evidence. Temperature influences endurance in ways that are reflected quietly in reports. In summer months, exposed granite areas can exceed ambient air temperatures by a wide margin. Search logs sometimes include notes about heat stress experienced by rescuers, which indirectly indicate conditions faced by the missing person earlier. In cases where hikers planned short day trips, limited water supplies are often mentioned as factual details, not as interpretation. The presence or absence of water containers becomes part of the equipment inventory recorded at campsites or vehicles. Cold conditions appear more often in shoulder seasons and at elevation. Nighttime temperatures in the Sierra Nevada can drop rapidly, even after warm days. When searches extend overnight, weather logs record minimum temperatures because they affect survival timelines and search urgency. These entries are numerical and detached. They do not speculate on experience. They establish context for decisions such as extending daylight searches or deploying additional resources. Precipitation alters terrain and evidence simultaneously. Rain can obscure footprints, flatten vegetation, and redistribute loose soil. Search documentation often notes rainfall amounts between last known contact and search initiation. In some cases, rain is recorded as having occurred before any organized search began, limiting the usefulness of ground tracking. This detail appears in after-action summaries as a constraint, not as an explanation. Snow presents a different set of effects. In Yosemite and surrounding Sierra Nevada areas, snow can fall at any time of year above certain elevations. Early season snowstorms have been recorded in several missing person cases. Snow can both preserve and conceal tracks. Fresh snowfall may capture footprints clearly for a short period, while subsequent accumulation erases them entirely. Search teams document snow depth and age because these factors determine whether tracks can be followed. In historical cases, snow often marks a boundary in the record. Search efforts may pause or change strategy when snow accumulation increases risk. In some files, notes indicate that areas searched earlier in the season were later recovered by snow, effectively resetting conditions. When remains are found years later, recovery reports sometimes note that the location had been snow-covered during previous searches. Wind affects both movement and detection. Strong winds are common along ridgelines and exposed slopes. Search logs record wind speed and direction because they influence helicopter operations and sound travel. In ground searches, wind noise can mask calls or whistles. These effects are not dramatized in records. They appear as operational notes tied to specific dates and times. Water levels fluctuate with weather and snowmelt. In spring and early summer, creeks and rivers run higher and colder. Incidents involving water often include measurements of flow rate and temperature taken close to the time of disappearance. In the Hayden T. Clemenot case near Upper Chilnualna Falls in July 2023, official reporting referenced fast, cold water conditions linked to seasonal snowmelt. These details inform search scope and safety decisions. They did not alter the definition of the last known point. The record remained fixed to time and location. Weather also affects visibility from the air. Cloud cover, smoke from wildfires, and haze reduce contrast. Aerial search logs note ceiling height, visibility distance, and sun angle. In wildfire seasons, smoke can ground aircraft entirely. When this happens, search plans are revised and documented. The absence of aerial coverage becomes part of the file, listed alongside reasons such as wind or mechanical limitations. Wildfires themselves leave a distinct mark on records. In recent decades, fire activity has increased in the Sierra Nevada. Active fires can close areas, delay searches, or restrict access to recovery sites. In some missing person cases, search efforts were paused or rerouted due to fire behavior. These pauses are noted as external constraints. They are dated and referenced to incident command decisions rather than narrative developments. Weather influences how long searches remain active. Prolonged storms can compress search windows, while extended periods of clear weather allow broader coverage. Search managers document these windows precisely. When searches are suspended, weather conditions are sometimes cited as one of several factors, along with resource availability and elapsed time. The language remains administrative. Personal equipment records often intersect with weather data. Clothing descriptions in missing person notices include fabric type, color, and layering. These details matter because they interact with temperature and precipitation. For example, a light jacket listed in a summer case may be noted without comment, but combined with recorded nighttime temperatures, it provides a factual context. The record does not interpret adequacy. It preserves compatibility between gear and conditions. Weather can also change how long evidence remains visible. Items left in open areas may be scattered by wind or covered by debris after storms. In some recovery reports, equipment is found downslope from expected locations, with notes indicating post-disappearance weather events that could have contributed to movement. These notes are careful to distinguish between observed conditions and inferred processes. In the case of Peter Jackson, whose daypack was found in 2019, 3 years after his disappearance, the discovery occurred after multiple seasonal cycles had passed. While public notices did not detail intervening weather, internal records compare the find location with past search efforts conducted under different conditions. Snow, rain, and vegetation growth over those years altered the landscape repeatedly. The record reflects this through dates and conditions attached to each search phase. Weather also affects witness reliability. Visibility conditions influence how accurately distances and times are estimated by observers. Dispatch logs preserve original wording when witnesses describe weather at the time of sightings. Phrases like clear, overcast, or smoky are recorded because they frame perception. These descriptions are not standardized. They remain as reported. Over time, accumulated weather data becomes part of the case structure. Each search day adds a layer: temperature range, precipitation, wind, visibility. Together, these layers explain why certain methods were used or not used at specific times. They do not explain outcomes, they establish constraints. The Sierra Nevada corridor is subject to rapid and uneven weather change. This variability does not create anomalies in records, it creates intervals. Clear days allow certain actions, storms delay others, snow resets surfaces, heat accelerates fatigue. Each effect is logged quietly. When a case remains unresolved, weather continues to alter the physical environment, even as the administrative record remains static. Trails shift slightly, vegetation grows or burns, snow comes and goes. The file does not update itself in response. It waits for new information. In this way, weather alters the record without rewriting it. It changes what can be found, when it can be found, and how it can be documented. The disappearance remains fixed to its last confirmed details, while conditions move on, objects that enter the file alone. When an object is located without its owner, the record changes form. The search no longer moves outward from a person, it folds inward around an item. This transition is procedural. It begins with location control. The area is marked, coordinates recorded, and access limited until documentation is complete. The object itself becomes the reference point. Items are not described emotionally, they are catalogued. Reports note material, color, size, manufacturer, condition, and orientation. A backpack lying upright is recorded differently from one collapsed or partially buried. Zippers, buckles, and closures are photographed as found. If contents are visible, they are listed in place before removal. The object is treated as a static feature of the landscape at the moment it is discovered. Context is not assumed. An item found near a trail does not imply trail travel. An item found downslope does not confirm descent. Investigators record what is present and what is absent. A backpack without food, a jacket without insulation, or footwear without matching tracks are all noted as states, not interpretations. The file preserves these states so they can be compared later. Discovery timing matters as much as location. When an object is found years after a disappearance, the report includes the date of discovery and compares it against earlier search activity. If the area had been searched previously, that fact is noted. If it had not, the omission is documented without explanation. The difference between searched and unsearched is procedural, not evaluative. In Yosemite and the broader Sierra Nevada corridor, objects are often found by chance rather than by planned search. Hikers, maintenance crews, and seasonal staff encounter items while performing unrelated tasks. These finds enter the system through dispatch calls. The caller's description is logged verbatim when possible. The report distinguishes between what was observed and what was inferred by the finder. Once verified, objects are cross-referenced against missing person records. Serial numbers, brand styles, and purchase details are used to establish association. In some cases, confirmation is immediate. In others, it requires consultation with family members or retailers. This process is documented step by step. The object does not belong to a case until that association is confirmed. The discovery of Peter Jackson's daypack in 2019 illustrates how objects re-enter closed files. His daypack was located 3 years later between Aspen Valley and Smith Peak. The report notes the location relative to known terrain features and compares it to earlier search grids. The find did not resolve the case. It added a new data point. The record expanded laterally, not forward, within the same file. Condition assessment is precise. Fabric wear, fading, mold growth, and animal damage are documented because they indicate exposure duration. These details are factual. They do not establish a timeline by themselves. They are preserved so that environmental factors, such as weather cycles, can be considered alongside them. The report avoids language that suggests sequence unless sequence is directly observed. Objects found in water are handled differently. When items are recovered from creeks or lakes, water conditions at the time of recovery are logged. Flow rate, depth, and debris presence are noted. The position of the item lodged against a rock, submerged in sediment, or floating, is recorded exactly. Water movement after a disappearance can relocate objects significantly. Reports distinguish between recovery location and possible origin without asserting a connection. Clothing is treated with particular care. Color visibility, fabric type, and layering are recorded because they affect both search detection and environmental interaction. A jacket found folded differs from one found tangled in brush. Footwear found together differs from footwear found separated. These distinctions are not emphasized narratively, they are indexed. Electronics introduce additional documentation steps. When phones, cameras, or GPS devices are found, they are handled as both physical objects and data sources. Power, state, damage, and accessibility are logged before any attempt to extract information. If data retrieval is possible, that process is documented separately. The presence or absence of usable data becomes part of the file, not a conclusion. Objects are also evaluated against environmental plausibility. A lightweight item found far from a trail may prompt a review of wind patterns or slope angles. A heavy item found downslope may be compared against gravity-driven movement. These reviews are internal. Public summaries rarely include them. What appears in the record is the comparison itself, not the reasoning behind it. Some objects remain unclaimed. When no missing person case matches an item, it is catalogued and stored according to policy. These items exist in the system without narrative attachment. They are available for future comparison. The absence of association is itself a documented state. In cases where multiple objects are found over time, each discovery is logged independently. They are not automatically linked. Only after verification do they become part of a single case timeline. This prevents assumptions based on proximity alone. Distance between finds is measured precisely, even when the distance seems small on foot. The landscape influences how objects persist. Granite surfaces preserve items differently than forest floors. Organic soil can absorb and conceal, while open rock exposes items to sun and wind. Search records include terrain type at recovery sites because it affects visibility and degradation. These notes remain technical. Human activity also affects object persistence. Popular areas experience constant foot traffic, which can move, damage, or remove items unintentionally. Remote areas change more slowly. When an object is found in a high-traffic zone long after a disappearance, reports note the improbability without assigning cause. The record acknowledges the inconsistency and moves on. Recovered objects do not close cases. They modify them. Each item adds another anchor point, similar to a last known location. The file now contains multiple fixed references, each dated and placed. The space between them remains undefined. In the Sierra Nevada corridor, objects are often the only elements that change over time. The person remains missing. The terrain remains. Weather cycles repeat. The file grows thicker as objects are added, each one carefully described and placed. These additions do not form a story. They form a catalogue. The catalogue allows comparison across years and across cases. It preserves accuracy by refusing to connect points that cannot be connected by record alone. An object found without context is not treated as a message. It is treated as a coordinate. It occupies space in the same way a campsite or trailhead does. It becomes part of the map that searchers and investigators use, even when the map remains incomplete. The record accepts this incompleteness. It does not attempt to resolve it. It holds the object in place and waits for another fixed point to appear. Time gaps that remain unmarked. After searches slow or stop, a case does not end. It enters a different state. This state is defined by absence of activity rather than resolution. Files remain open, but no new material is added unless something verifiable appears. The time between these moments is not described narratively. It is left unfilled. In official records, these periods are referred to indirectly. Dates appear without accompanying actions. A report may list an initial search phase, followed by a later discovery or update years afterward, with nothing recorded in between. The gap is visible only because of the spacing between entries. It is not labeled or explained. Law enforcement and park agencies maintain these files according to retention policy. Paper records are archived. Digital records are stored in case management systems. The status may be listed as active, inactive, or suspended, depending on jurisdiction, but the underlying structure remains unchanged. The last confirmed facts stay fixed at the top of the file. During these intervals, no assumptions are added retroactively. Investigators do not rewrite earlier entries based on later developments. Each note remains anchored to the date it was written. This preserves chronological integrity but leaves long stretches of time without representation. The absence itself becomes a structural feature of the case. Public-facing information mirrors this pattern. Missing person notices may remain posted with no updates. Online bulletins often repeat the same details year after year: name, age at disappearance, clothing, last known location. The passage of time is not reflected in the language. A person missing for months and a person missing for decades may appear identical in format. Families sometimes provide updates during these periods, but only certain information is added to official records. Tips that cannot be verified are logged separately or not included at all. Investigators record what can be confirmed. Personal beliefs, impressions, or patterns perceived over time are not incorporated unless they produce a tangible lead. Environmental change continues regardless of record status. Trails erode or are rerouted. Fires alter vegetation. Storms reshape drainages. These changes are not tracked within missing person files unless a new search is initiated. It remains tied to the conditions present at the time of disappearance and any subsequent documented searches. When new searches occur years later, they are treated as separate phases. The time gap between phases is acknowledged only through dates. Reports may state that an area was searched, again, in light of new information, or after a subsequent discovery. The intervening years are not summarized. They remain unaccounted for in narrative terms. This structure is evident in long-term Yosemite cases. The disappearance of Peter Jackson in September 2016 was followed by active searches that year. His daypack was discovered in 2019. Between those events, the file shows no public updates. The gap does not imply inactivity elsewhere. It indicates that nothing verifiable entered the record during that time. In some cases, decades pass without change. The 1,981 disappearance of Stacey Arras includes extensive documentation from the initial search period. Later references to the case repeat those early details. The years between are not described. They exist as elapsed time, not as recorded experience. Administrative systems are designed this way intentionally. They prioritize accuracy over continuity. Adding speculative material to fill gaps would compromise the reliability of the record. As a result, time gaps are preserved rather than explained. These gaps can influence later interpretation. When remains or objects are found long after a disappearance, investigators must compare current conditions with outdated maps and notes. They reconstruct past environments using historical weather data, old trail layouts, and archived aerial imagery. The original file does not anticipate this work. It simply holds the earliest verified information. Search planners reviewing old cases often encounter silence in the middle of the timeline. There are clear starts and occasional re-entries, but little in between. This does not indicate neglect. It reflects a threshold. Without new evidence, the system does not generate new entries. The same applies to public memory. Cases may resurface briefly when anniversaries are noted or when similar incidents occur nearby. These moments do not alter the official file unless new facts are produced. Media attention does not fill gaps. Documentation does. In some instances, time gaps are interrupted by chance. A hiker reports an item, a construction project uncovers remains, a wildfire clears vegetation and exposes ground that had not been visible. These events add single points to long timelines. The years before and after remain unchanged. The administrative language used when a case is revisited reflects this separation. Phrases like "after review of the case file" or "based on previously documented information" appear in internal reports. They signal that the past has been consulted, not reinterpreted. The gap remains intact, These intervals also affect how probability is treated. Search models that estimate travel distance over time become less relevant as months and years pass. After a certain point, movement assumptions are no longer applied. In unresolved cases, time does not accumulate meaning within the file. It accumulates duration. The difference between 1 year and 10 years is quantitative, not descriptive. The structure does not change to reflect emotional, social, or environmental developments. This approach can feel incomplete to those outside the system. Within the system, it is consistent. Each file contains what is known, when it was known, and nothing more. Gaps are not errors. They are preserved states. In the Sierra Nevada corridor, these unmarked intervals are common. Disappearances occur in environments that continue to change while records remain static. The land does not pause. The file does. When a case remains unresolved, time becomes its longest component. It stretches without entries, without annotations, without commentary. The gap itself becomes part of the case structure, even though it contains no information. The record accommodates this by design. It allows space to remain empty until something concrete arrives. Until then, the gap stays open, defined only by its start and its lack of end. Familiar routes that gradually lose form. Routes in the Sierra Nevada are often described by name, mileage, and difficulty, yet their physical expression changes in ways that are not immediately visible. A trail may remain listed as maintained while its ground surface shifts through erosion, seasonal use, and partial rerouting. These changes do not erase the route, they soften it. Over time, clarity becomes uneven along its length. Many Sierra routes were established long before current mapping standards. Early trail alignments followed practical lines through forest and granite, shaped by pack animals and foot traffic rather than engineered design. As visitor numbers increased, some of these routes were modified incrementally. Switchbacks were added, drainage crossings adjusted, and segments moved to reduce wear. Each adjustment altered continuity without redefining the trail as a whole. Maintenance records reflect tasks rather than experience. Crews document hazard removal, tread repair, and stabilization. They do not record how a person perceives direction while walking. A cleared section may feel obvious, while an adjacent stretch blends into surrounding ground. This contrast can occur within a single mile, creating alternating zones of clarity and ambiguity. The effect is visible in areas that support both day use and through travel. Near Tuolumne Meadows, multiple trails intersect with meadows, service roads, and informal paths created by repeated crossings. During peak season, foot traffic spreads laterally as people seek dry ground or avoid congestion. Over time, these lateral movements create compacted lines that resemble official tread. When the maintained route curves or narrows, these lines can appear equally valid. A documented example appears in the 2018 disappearance of Randall Jones, an experienced outdoorsman reported missing after hiking in the Tuolumne Meadows area. Public reporting placed him near established trails in a high-use zone. Search summaries reference broad coverage of trail corridors and adjacent terrain. What the record does not describe is how route definition at the time may have been influenced by seasonal wear, snowmelt patterns, or dispersed foot traffic in meadow-adjacent sections. Seasonal transitions accelerate route diffusion. Early summer snow obscures tread, forcing hikers to choose lines based on visible ground rather than signage. When snow retreats, the first usable path often becomes the preferred one, regardless of official alignment. Repetition reinforces that choice. By late summer, the reinforced line may not correspond exactly to the mapped route. Near lakes and rivers, route clarity weakens further. Access points multiply as visitors approach water from different angles. Some of these access paths become semi-permanent through repeated use. Others fade quickly. The ground offers multiple cues, none of which announce their status. Movement continues along what appears stable underfoot. This pattern was noted indirectly during searches for a missing hiker near Florence Lake in the Sierra National Forest in 2017. Reports reference numerous faint paths leading toward water access and campsites. The individual was last known to be traveling on an established trail, but search documentation expanded into adjacent terrain that offered similar ease of travel. The presence of multiple viable lines complicated reconstruction. Route definition is also affected by management decisions intended to reduce impact. In sensitive areas, signs may be removed or minimized. Closed segments may be blocked lightly or allowed to recover naturally. These areas do not always appear closed on the ground. Vegetation regrows unevenly, leaving visible corridors that appear intentional. Without clear markers, a person moving steadily may continue along a former route without recognizing the change. Fire introduces another layer of change. Burned areas remove vegetation that once framed trails. The absence of contrast makes tread harder to distinguish. Temporary reroutes established during recovery may later be decommissioned, leaving traces that persist for years. In fire-affected zones near the Stanislaus National Forest boundary, search reports have noted difficulty identifying original trail alignments due to overlapping old and new paths. Road-adjacent routes behave similarly. Scenic pullouts and rest areas often connect to short walking routes that are not formally designated. These routes develop through repeated use rather than planning. In the 2020 disappearance of a day hiker reported missing near a Tioga Road turnout, search documentation referenced informal footpaths extending from the roadside into forested slopes. None were marked. All appeared walkable. The lack of distinction required searchers to treat the area as a broad access zone rather than a defined trailhead. Elevation influences how these changes are perceived. On gentle terrain, deviation feels minor. A person can drift laterally or downhill without sensing a directional shift. In higher elevation basins, open granite surfaces spread foot traffic across wide areas. Trails become conceptual rather than physical. On maps, they remain precise. On the ground, they dissolve into zones of movement. Search planning accounts for this by expanding beyond trail lines. Internal documents describe coverage of adjacent travel corridors rather than specific routes. This language reflects an understanding that movement is guided by ground conditions, not by map lines. Historical cases show that experience does not prevent this effect. Several missing individuals in the Sierra Nevada were described as familiar with the area or with similar terrain. Familiarity reduces reliance on signage. It increases reliance on visual and physical cues. When those cues weaken, familiarity may delay recognition of deviation. Route changes also complicate later interpretation of discoveries. When objects are found near a trail, reports specify distance and orientation rather than naming the route alone. This precision acknowledges that the trail's physical position may have shifted since the disappearance. Proximity is measured in meters, not assumptions. In the case of a 2014 recovery near Donner Summit, investigators noted that remains were located close to a trail corridor that had undergone maintenance changes in the intervening years. Archived maps showed the route's alignment at the time of disappearance differed slightly from its later position. The record accommodated this by referencing terrain features rather than trail names. Maps lag behind these changes. Printed maps update on long cycles. Digital maps update more frequently, but still generalize. Neither captures informal paths or seasonal shifts. Permits and signage reflect intended use, not actual ground conditions at a given moment. This lag matters when reconstructing movement. Investigators consult archived materials, ranger recollections, and aerial imagery to approximate past conditions. These sources provide structure, but not detail. They cannot recreate how a route appeared under specific light, weather, and use patterns. Administrative language reflects this uncertainty. Reports use formulations that avoid commitment to a single route. Phrases like "believed to have been hiking in the area" or "last seen near" appear consistently. They acknowledge presence without defining path. The Sierra Nevada corridor contains many routes that remain labeled as easy while losing physical precision. They function adequately for most users. Their guidance weakens gradually. This weakening does not trigger reclassification or warnings. The route remains familiar in name. For someone moving without stopping to reorient, the change may not register. Each step aligns with the ground ahead. Only later, when reconstructing movement, does ambiguity become visible. Records do not attempt to resolve this ambiguity. They document what can be confirmed: locations, distances, terrain types. They avoid explaining how route clarity may have influenced decisions. That influence remains implicit. The land continues to adjust through use, weather, and management. Routes respond accordingly. Their gradual loss of form is not a failure of mapping or maintenance. It is a characteristic of living landscapes. In areas described as easy, this characteristic is easy to overlook. Familiar routes feel stable because they are named and signed. On the ground, stability is relative. Definition varies. The corridor remains passable. The routes remain accessible. What changes is how clearly they guide movement without active attention. Over distance and time, that guidance thins. Maps that lag behind the ground. Maps in the Sierra Nevada are designed to be stable. They change slowly, through revision cycles measured in years rather than seasons. This stability supports planning and orientation, but it also means that maps often reflect an earlier version of the landscape. The ground, by contrast, changes continuously. The difference between the two becomes apparent only when movement must be reconstructed after the fact. Official trail maps used in Yosemite National Park and surrounding forests are compiled from surveys, maintenance records, and management decisions. Once published, they present routes as fixed lines with defined junctions, distances, and difficulty ratings. They do not show erosion scars, fallen signage, informal detours, or short-term reroutes created during repairs or fire recovery. As a result, the map remains internally consistent even when the terrain does not. Printed maps are the slowest to update. Many visitors rely on editions that are several years old. Even newer printings often reuse base data with minor adjustments. Digital maps update more frequently, but they also generalize. They prioritize readability over precision and often suppress minor route variations. Informal paths, service tracks, and user-created routes are typically omitted. Search files occasionally note this mismatch. When investigators review likely travel paths, they compare multiple map sources, park brochures, USGS quadrangle, and internal planning maps. Differences between these sources are logged. A trail that appears continuous on one map may show gaps or alternate alignments on another. These discrepancies are treated as technical issues, not errors. The effect of outdated mapping is visible in high-use areas where ground conditions shift quickly. In Tuolumne Meadows, seasonal flooding and snowmelt alter foot traffic patterns each year. Boardwalks may be installed, removed, or bypassed. Trails skirt wet areas differently depending on conditions. Maps show a single alignment. The ground presents several. During the 2018 search for Randall Jones near Tuolumne Meadows, search planners referenced multiple map layers to account for these variations. Public summaries stated that trails and surrounding areas were searched. Internally, planners expanded coverage beyond mapped routes to include areas where foot traffic was likely to concentrate under current conditions. The map served as a starting framework, not a boundary. Road-adjacent areas present similar challenges. Tioga Road crosses varied terrain with frequent pullouts and informal stopping points. Short walking routes extend from these areas without formal designation. Maps typically mark the road and major trails, leaving surrounding ground unclassified. When a 2020 disappearance was reported near a Tioga Road turnout, search documentation treated the area as an access zone rather than a trailhead. The map provided orientation, but it did not define movement option. Maps also simplify elevation. Contour lines indicate slope, but do not convey microtopography. Small benches, shallow depressions, and minor ridges influence movement without appearing on standard maps. In reconstruction, investigators consider how these features may have guided travel even though they are not represented graphically. The map remains an abstraction. Reroutes complicate matters further. When a trail segment is moved to reduce erosion or avoid hazards, the change may not appear on maps immediately. Temporary reroutes may be marked on the ground but omitted from published materials. After repairs are completed, the temporary route may be closed, reopened, or partially reclaimed by vegetation. The map may reflect none of these states. Fire recovery introduces additional lag. After major fires, trail systems can change rapidly. New alignments may be cut to avoid unstable ground. Old routes may be abandoned, maps may continue to show pre-fire conditions for several seasons. During searches conducted in fire-affected areas near Stanislaus National Forest, planners documented differences between mapped routes and visible ground features. These differences required on-site interpretation rather than reliance on cartographic guidance. Water features are another source of divergence. Creeks shift channels during heavy runoff. Seasonal streams appear and disappear. Bridges may be washed out and replaced with temporary crossings. Maps often show a single crossing point. On the ground, multiple options may exist. In reconstruction, investigators note whether a person could have crossed at locations not marked on the map. Navigation aids carried by hikers mirror these limitations. GPS devices and phone applications rely on the same underlying map data. While they provide real-time positioning, they do not update route information dynamically. A person may follow a digital line that no longer corresponds exactly to the ground. Deviations may appear minor on the screen but significant on foot. Search documentation reflects caution around this issue. Reports often state that an individual was believed to be hiking in the area shown on the map, rather than asserting a specific route. This phrasing acknowledges that map-based intent does not guarantee map-based movement. Historical cases illustrate the persistence of this lag. In the 1999 disappearance of a solo hiker near Mineral King, early reports referenced established trails leading from the parking area. Later search phases expanded into adjacent terrain after it became clear that multiple informal paths existed beyond the mapped route. The original map alignment remained in the file, but planning adapted to observed conditions. Maps also influence expectations. Trails labeled as easy imply predictability. When the ground diverges from that expectation, recognition may be delayed. A person may continue forward, assuming that clarity will return. This assumption is not recorded in files. What is recorded is the map designation and the absence of confirmation beyond a certain point. When items or remains are found, map comparison becomes central. Recovery locations are plotted against multiple map editions. Investigators note distances to mapped routes and discrepancies between expected and actual alignment. These notes remain technical. They do not reinterpret the map. They document its limitations. Administrative language maintains separation between representation and reality. Maps are referenced as tools, not authorities. Reports do not state that a person left the trail unless confirmed. They state that the person was last known near a mapped feature. The distinction preserves accuracy. Over time, maps are revised. New editions incorporate changes slowly. Some informal routes are never added. Others appear briefly and are removed later. The map evolves, but it never fully synchronizes with the ground. There is always a delay. In the Sierra Nevada corridor, this delay affects reconstruction more than navigation. Most hikers complete trips without issue. When a disappearance occurs, the lag becomes relevant. Investigators must account for the difference between what the map showed and what the person encountered. This accounting is done through comparison rather than correction. Archived imagery, ranger recollections, and maintenance logs supplement maps. None replace them. Each source adds context without resolving uncertainty. The record reflects this layered approach. Maps are cited alongside terrain descriptions and search observations. No single source is treated as definitive. The ground remains the reference, even when it cannot be fully recovered. In cases that remain unresolved, the map becomes a fixed artifact. It represents the intended structure of the landscape at a particular time. The ground continues to change beyond it. This gap does not imply failure. It reflects the limits of representation. When movement must be reconstructed later, this difference matters. The line on the map is not the path taken. It is a guide that may have been followed, approximated, or abandoned without notice. The administrative record accommodates this by remaining cautious. The corridor remains mapped. The ground remains variable. Between them, a lag persists. Signs that enter the record after assumptions set. In some Sierra Nevada disappearances, information arrives after the main search period has already shaped the case. When this happens, the record does not reset. The new material is added alongside earlier entries. dated by when it was received rather than when the event may have occurred. The distinction between timing and relevance is preserved carefully. A well-documented example is the disappearance of Clyde Charles Minaret near Mammoth Lakes, California. Minaret, age 28, was reported missing on the 17th of February, 1977, after failing to return from a day trip in the eastern Sierra Nevada. His vehicle, a yellow Volkswagen Beetle, was found parked at the Minaret Summit trailhead area off State Route 203. The route was considered accessible and familiar, not remote by Sierra standards. Initial searches focused on the surrounding trails, slopes, and drainages under winter conditions. Search operations in the Minaret case were extensive. They included ground teams, dog units, and aerial searches conducted over multiple days. Snow conditions limited coverage in some areas, but the immediate vicinity of the trailhead and likely travel corridors were examined. After these efforts concluded without result, the case moved into a dormant state. The last known point remained fixed at the parked vehicle. Months later, and then years later, new information began to surface. These additions did not come from the landscape directly. They came from people. Multiple individuals contacted law enforcement to report sightings of a man resembling Minaret in locations far from Mammoth Lakes, including Nevada, Arizona, and parts of the Pacific Northwest. Some reports placed the individual in transient settings, such as roadside stops or public facilities. Others described brief encounters without sustained interaction. Each of these reports was logged individually. The dates the sightings allegedly occurred were recorded separately from the dates the reports were made. In several instances, there was a significant gap between the two. Witnesses often explained that they had not initially realized the relevance of what they saw, or had only later connected the memory to the missing person case after media exposure. Investigators treated these reports as tips. Descriptions were preserved in the witnesses' own words. Clothing, behavior, speech patterns, and physical appearance were recorded when provided. Many accounts included uncertainty. Phrases such as resembled, looked like, or could have been were left intact in documentation. The reports were evaluated for consistency with known details, including age progression and physical characteristics. No sighting was independently verified. None produced physical evidence or corroborating records such as photographs, receipts, or third-party confirmation. As a result, the reports did not prompt a reopening of the original search area near Minaret Summit. Instead, they were appended to the case file as later arriving information. The original assumptions about likely movement from the trailhead were not revised. The timing of these reports shaped how they were handled. Had similar sightings been reported within days of the disappearance, they may have influenced search direction or resource allocation. Because they arrived after active searching had ended, they were assessed under a different standard. They were considered possible but unconfirmed indicators, not actionable leads. This distinction is visible in the structure of the Minaret case file. Early entries cluster tightly around February 1977, documenting search efforts, weather conditions, and terrain coverage. Later entries appear sporadically over subsequent years, each separated by long intervals. The spacing itself conveys the shift from active investigation to long-term documentation. Public communication reflected the same restraint. Law enforcement acknowledged that sightings had been reported, but did not characterize them as evidence of Minaret's survival or movement. Statements emphasized that the case remained unsolved. No official narrative was constructed to connect the sightings into a coherent account. The Minaret case is frequently cited because of this pattern. It demonstrates how late-arriving signs can coexist with early assumptions without displacing them. The trailhead remains the last confirmed location. The sightings exist as separate data points, unlinked by proof. This approach is consistent with agency practice across the Sierra Nevada. Late information is not ignored, but it is not allowed to overwrite earlier verified facts. Each entry is anchored to its own moment of documentation. The file becomes layered rather than rewritten. Delayed signs also include physical discoveries made long after disappearance. In some Sierra cases, clothing or equipment has been found years later during unrelated activities such as hiking, maintenance, or fire recovery. When this occurs, the discovery is documented as a new event. Investigators note whether the area had been searched previously and under what conditions. In the minaret case, no personal belongings conclusively linked to Clyde Minaret were ever recovered. This absence has remained unchanged despite decades of additional information. The lack of physical confirmation has kept later reports categorized as unverified. The handling of delayed signs reflects a broader principle. Once search assumptions are set, they guide interpretation. They are not immutable, but they are not easily displaced. New information must meet a higher threshold to alter established frameworks. Timing influences credibility not because of content, but because of consequence. Environmental factors contribute to this dynamic. Snow, vegetation, growth, and land use change over time, altering what can be observed. A sign that appears years later reflects the landscape at discovery, not the landscape at disappearance. The record preserves this distinction by dating entries strictly. In some cases, delayed signs prompt limited follow-up. A reported sighting may result in a brief check of records or outreach to another jurisdiction. These actions are documented as discrete steps. They do not reopen the original search area unless supported by corroboration. The Minaret file shows several such follow-ups. Agencies contacted law enforcement in other states to compare missing person reports. Age progression sketches were updated and circulated. These actions were recorded with dates and outcomes. None produced confirmation. Over time, delayed signs often become the final additions to a case. They remain in the file, available for future comparison. They do not resolve uncertainty, they extend it. This structure allows the record to remain factual. It avoids narrative closure where none exists. Each sign is preserved without being elevated beyond its evidentiary weight. In the Sierra Nevada corridor, cases like Clyde Minarets illustrate how disappearances on accessible routes can generate long afterlives of information. The trailhead, the early search, and the later sightings coexist within the same file without merging into a single explanation. The record holds them apart. It preserves sequence. It documents restraint. Late signs enter after assumptions set. They do not undo those assumptions. They occupy their place in time, waiting for something that can connect them to the earlier record. Until that happens, they remain entries without resolution, factual in form, limited in consequence, and fixed within the structure of the case. Decisions made without visibility. Search decisions in the Sierra Nevada are often made under conditions where visibility is incomplete or temporarily absent. These decisions are not framed as judgments about outcomes. They are framed as assessments of what can and cannot be observed at a given moment. When observation is limited, action is adjusted rather than abandoned. Winter conditions present the clearest example. Snow alters both terrain and detection simultaneously. It covers tracks, reshapes landmarks, and restricts access to slopes and drainages. In documented cases, search managers record snow depth, stability, and forecasted accumulation before assigning teams. These measurements determine where movement is possible and where it is not. The 1,977 disappearance of Clyde Charles Minaret near Minaret Summit illustrates how such decisions are recorded. Minaret's vehicle was found parked near the summit area along State Route 203 inches February during a period of active winter conditions. Search teams deployed despite snow, but coverage was constrained by avalanche risk, reduced daylight, and limited ground visibility. Records from the Mono County Sheriff's Office and cooperating agencies note that certain areas could not be safely accessed at that time. In these situations, absence of coverage is documented explicitly. Search logs identify zones that were not entered and state the reason. Language remains technical. Phrases such as unsafe due to snow conditions or aerial visibility limited appear without elaboration. These entries establish that lack of coverage was a consequence of conditions, not oversight. Aerial searches are particularly sensitive to visibility. Helicopter operations require clear sightlines and stable weather. Wind speed, cloud cover, and light angle are recorded before flights are authorized. In the Minaret case, aerial support was used selectively when conditions allowed. When storms or low ceilings grounded aircraft, The decision was logged and operations shifted to planning or standby status. Ground teams face similar constraints. Steep slopes under snow are avoided when stability is uncertain. Drainages may be inaccessible due to cornices or ice buildup. When teams are pulled back, the withdrawal is documented with time and reason. These entries appear alongside those describing active searching, creating a record that alternates between action and restraint. Visibility is also affected by terrain independent of weather. Dense forest, broken granite, and complex topography limit lines of sight, even under clear conditions. In such environments, searchers rely on spacing, communication protocols, and sweep patterns. When these methods are ineffective due to terrain complexity, supervisors adjust tactics. They may reduce team size, change direction of travel, or suspend coverage of a segment. These adjustments appear in search plans as revisions. Original assignments are crossed out or superseded by new ones. The record shows change without commentary. The reason is implicit in the conditions noted elsewhere in the file. In some cases, searches are paused entirely. This occurs when conditions are expected to worsen or when continued effort would increase risk without increasing observational capacity. Suspension is documented carefully. Agencies use phrases like search operations scaled back or active searching suspended pending improved conditions. The language avoids finality. It indicates a temporary state. In the minaret search, winter conditions limited prolonged operations. After initial efforts failed to locate him and snow conditions persisted, active searching was reduced. The case did not close. It entered a monitoring phase. This transition is visible in the spacing of entries rather than in explicit statements. Visibility limitations also affect interpretation of evidence. Tracks observed one day may be erased the next. Objects seen from the air may not be relocatable on the ground. Searchers document these discrepancies without attempting to resolve them. The record preserves what was observed and notes when it could not be confirmed. Other Sierra Nevada cases reflect similar decision-making. During early spring searches in Yosemite and Sequoia National Park, snow bridges over creeks create hazards that limit access. Reports note that certain drainages were deferred until later in the season. These deferrals are logged as planned future actions rather than omissions. Fire and smoke create another form of visibility loss. In recent decades, wildfire activity has increasingly affected Sierra searches. Smoke reduces aerial effectiveness and limits ground operations due to health concerns. When fires are active nearby, search areas may be closed entirely. Decisions to halt operations are documented as coordination with Fire Incident Command, not as investigative conclusions. Low visibility also arises from time rather than environment. Searches that extend into evening hours face diminishing light. Night operations are limited to areas where terrain is known and manageable. In unfamiliar or hazardous zones, teams are withdrawn at dusk. These withdrawals are planned in advance and recorded when executed. When daylight returns, conditions may not match those of the previous day. Shadows change, snow softens, wind redistributes debris. Searchers note these changes because they affect comparability. An area searched under one set of conditions is not considered identical under another. Visibility constraints shape how long searches remain intensive. Early phases prioritize rescue under the assumption that observation can still reveal a living person. As time passes and conditions fluctuate, the focus shifts toward documentation and risk management. This shift is not announced. It is reflected in resource allocation and search frequency. Public summaries often condense this process. They state that searches were conducted and later suspended. The internal record shows why. Weather logs, risk assessments, and operational notes fill the file. They explain decisions without justifying them. These decisions do not imply reduced concern. They reflect the limits of observation. Search agencies operate under duty of care principles. They are required to balance effort with safety. When visibility prevents effective searching, restraint becomes a documented action. In the minaret case, subsequent seasons brought new opportunities for visibility. Snowmelt opened terrain previously inaccessible. Limited follow-up searches occurred when conditions improved. These efforts were logged as new phases. They did not retroactively alter earlier decisions. Visibility also influences how later discoveries are interpreted. If remains or objects are found years later in an area previously unsearched due to conditions, records note that limitation. The absence of earlier coverage is contextualized. It is not framed as error. This approach preserves the integrity of the record. It acknowledges that observation is conditional. What cannot be seen cannot be searched effectively. Decisions made under limited visibility are preserved as part of the case history. Across the Sierra Nevada corridor, this pattern repeats. Easy access at the start of a route does not guarantee sustained visibility. Conditions change, observation narrows, decisions follow. The record reflects these decisions through dates, measurements, and brief explanations. It does not dramatize them. It does not speculate on alternatives. It documents constraint. When cases remain unresolved, these entries explain why certain areas remained unexamined for periods of time. They show that absence of information is sometimes a result of absence of visibility. The landscape eventually reveals more as conditions change. Until then, the file holds the decisions made in response to what could not be seen. Places that are revisited after attention fades. Some areas are searched only after time has passed. This does not occur because they were ignored. It occurs because they could not be reached, seen clearly, or prioritized during the early phases of a case. When circumstances change, those same places re-enter the record as new locations, even if they sit close to earlier activity. A documented example is the disappearance of William Bill Iwasco in Yosemite National Park. Iwasco, age 66, was reported missing in June 2010 after failing to return from a planned solo hike originating near Tamarack Flat Campground. He was an experienced hiker familiar with desert and backcountry travel. His vehicle was located at the trailhead, and early searches focused on established routes and nearby drainages. Initial search efforts were extensive. National Park Service rangers, search and rescue teams, and volunteers covered trails, slopes, and likely travel corridors. Helicopters were used when weather allowed. Canine teams were deployed. Search grids expanded outward over time. Despite these efforts, no confirmed trace of Iwasco was found during the initial search period. After weeks of activity, the operation was scaled back. The case did not close. It entered a long interval without new information. During this time, the landscape continued to change. Seasonal snow came and went. Vegetation grew and burned. Trails shifted subtly through use and maintenance. The administrative file remained unchanged, anchored to the last confirmed details from 2010. Years later, in October 2018, hikers discovered human remains and personal items in a remote area of Yosemite known as the North Rim, near an off-trail drainage west of Yosemite Valley. The location was rugged and difficult to access. The remains were later identified as belonging to William Iwasco. The recovery site was not far in linear distance from areas searched earlier, but it differed in accessibility and visibility. The terrain involved steep slopes, dense brush, and limited sight lines. During the original search, this area was either unsafe to enter or visually obscured under conditions present at the time. The discovery did not contradict earlier search records. It added a new point under different conditions. Recovery documentation treated the find as a new event. Rangers recorded the date, exact coordinates, terrain type, and condition of the remains and surrounding items. They noted proximity to terrain features, rather than to trails alone. The report did not claim that the area had been missed. It stated that the remains were found when they became visible. This pattern is not unique. In long-term Sierra Nevada cases, recovery locations are often places that could not be effectively searched earlier. Dense vegetation, cliff systems, seasonal snow, or unstable ground limit early access. As years pass, those constraints change. Fires remove undergrowth, erosion exposes ground, human movement increases familiarity with lesser used areas. In the Iwasco case, investigators reviewed earlier search grids after the discovery. Records showed that teams had searched nearby regions, but had not accessed the exact drainage where the remains were found. The reason was not omission, it was feasibility. The file documented this distinction clearly. When remains are found after long intervals, agencies avoid reframing the case. They do not describe the recovery as a correction. They describe it as an addition. The last known point remains the same. The recovery location becomes another fixed reference. The space between them is not filled with explanation. Public statements reflected this restraint. The National Park Service confirmed identification and recovery. They did not speculate on Owasco's movements or final decisions. They acknowledged the length of time between disappearance and discovery. They did not characterize the area as overlooked. This approach aligns with how late recoveries are handled across the Sierra Nevada. When people stop actively searching, the land does not stop changing. Over time, access improves, or visibility increases in places once considered impractical. These places are then encountered during unrelated activities, such as hiking, climbing, or maintenance. The administrative record accommodates this without revision. Recovery reports reference earlier searches, but do not reassess them. The original decisions remain valid within their context. The later discovery stands on its own. Terrain plays a significant role in these delayed recoveries. North-facing slopes retain vegetation and snow longer. Drainages funnel debris and conceal objects. Cliff bases collect material that falls or slides downslope. These features complicate early searches and favor later discovery when conditions shift. In some cases, recovery locations are close to popular areas, but separated by terrain complexity. The north rim of Yosemite, for example, sits above heavily visited valley routes, but is itself difficult to traverse. Linear distance does not equate to accessibility. This distinction is documented in search planning materials, but becomes most visible after recovery. Time also affects how thoroughly areas are examined. Early searches prioritize speed and coverage. Later encounters are slower and incidental. A hiker stopping to rest, a climber descending a route, or a ranger performing routine patrol may notice details that were invisible during rapid sweeps. Recovered items are documented in relation to both past and present conditions. Investigators note vegetation density at discovery and compare it to earlier descriptions. They note whether fires or storms occurred in the intervening years. These observations are factual. They are not used to assign responsibility. The Owasco recovery illustrates how a case can remain open without resolution for years, and then change state abruptly. The discovery did not provide a narrative, it provided an endpoint. The intervening years remained unaccounted for. This structure preserves consistency across cases. It prevents retrospective interpretation from altering earlier records. Each phase is preserved as it occurred, under the conditions present at the time. In the Sierra Nevada corridor, many searches end without answers. Some are revisited only when the land reveals something new. These revelations do not emerge because of renewed effort. They emerge because circumstances shift. The phrase, "after people stop looking," is not literal in records. Agencies continue to accept information and review cases periodically. What stops is intensive, active searching. What resumes is documentation when new material appears. Places searched later are often described differently. Reports emphasize terrain features rather than search strategy. They describe slopes, rock formations, and vegetation. The focus is on where the discovery occurred, not on why it occurred there. This distinction matters. It keeps the record grounded. It avoids implying that resolution was inevitable or preventable. It treats discovery as conditional rather than corrective. The Sierra Nevada landscape contains many such conditional spaces. Areas that are inaccessible one year may be reachable the next. What is hidden under snow, brush, or shadow may later become visible without intention. In these cases, the final chapter of a disappearance is written by circumstance, not design. The administrative record reflects that by maintaining separation between effort and outcome, the Owasco case now includes a recovery location that did not exist in the file for 8 years. It does not replace earlier entries, it joins them. The corridor remains the same. Trails remain labeled as easy. The land continues to shape what is seen and when it is seen. Records remain careful. They preserve facts, dates, and locations. They do not connect them into conclusions. When places are searched after attention fades, they enter the file quietly. They do not announce closure, they mark a change in status. The record accepts this change without commentary. It holds the final location alongside the first, leaving the distance between them intact. If you want to continue with the next chapter in this series, you can subscribe to the channel. New episodes are added regularly, each focusing on documented cases and verified records. You can also like the video if you find this format useful, or leave a comment if there is a case you would like to see examined in a future episode. Thank you for watching.